guys, today I'm going to go over some tips and tricks and do's and don'ts on getting a big turbo to spool up on a reasonably small engine. So I want to preface this by saying that one, every single number that you see in this video as far as timing or fueling or anything is literally for display purposes only. So don't go plugging in any timing numbers that I've got in this video and thinking that this is going to be what's going to make my car spool up. Every application is different. I'm going to show you how to kind of find the best way for your application, but the numbers, the actual numbers that you see in logs and whatnot are for my application, not yours, not your buddies, not anybody else's. The other thing is that if you've got an LS, you probably don't know how to confirm timing. I've already made a video on how to do that, so watch that video as well. So the everything that you see in this video, the timing numbers have been confirmed by shooting the balancer with a timing light. That right there, that's your balancer. That's your timing pointer. For you LS guys, you probably don't know what that is, but you have to make one. Use a coat hanger or buy one from somebody. I've already made a video on that, so watch that video too. But anyway, this video is going to go over how I have gone about over the years getting cars to spool. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an intro on my own car, because this is what I use for this test, because I've got about 30 different data logs to show you. I probably won't show all of them, but I've got a lot of them to show you, and a lot of them are going on the trans brake. And so first off, this is a 400-inch small block Ford. The intake manifold's big. The heads are big. The cam is reasonably large. And it's also got a this has got a 98 millimeter from Precision. So if you're watching this and you've got like a 5.3 liter LS with like an S475, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, my car builds boost instantly. You probably don't need to watch this video. But when you put, a man-sized turbo on the car, you'll probably have to come back and refer to this. So, three things I want to point out. The first, if the converter is way wrong for your application, as in way too tight for your application or for the amount of power that you made, this isn't going to be able to band-aid it. It may be able to help you a little bit, but it's not going to be able to fix just a complete wrong mechanical problem. The second thing is the exact same thing that I just said about the converter is true for the cam as well. So, buy a camshaft from a good, reputable person that knows camshafts, right? So there's a lot of people out there that do this. In the LS world, Brian Tooley, John Bewley, Tick Performance, Doug at Motion Raceworks works with Texas Speed. They've got some good cams. There's a lot of companies out there that do it for the LS world. For the small block Ford world, if you're building a turbo small block Ford, you're probably like me. You're older and you've already been through this before, and you're you know who to deal with. So I personally, my engine builder, TKM, Kevin Mullins, he spec'd the camshaft for me through Bullet Cam. But there's a lot of good guys out there in the small block Ford, small block Chevrolet world. And then if you're working with a big block with twins, you're probably going through Bullet, same deal. The man-sized motors, not the LS stuff. We all know who to deal with for camshafts. As far as converters, I really only stand behind one company when it comes to converters, and it's nothing against any other company out there that builds converters. I'm sure they're good. I'm sure they're great, but I've been through a couple different converters, and once I started dealing with Cameron Store Converter Services in Columbia, South Carolina, I won't use anybody else. It flat out works. So that's not a stab at any other converter company at all. I'm sure there's plenty of other good ones out there, but you need to be honest with your camshaft guy and with your converter guy, because if you tell them that this thing's going to make 2,000 horsepower and it really only makes 1,200 horsepower, your converter is going to be way too tight and your cam's probably going to be way too big, and you're going to be sitting here wondering why it won't go up on the chip. The other thing is, that I want to touch on is that cubic inch and compression make a big difference when it comes to getting one of these things to light off. So if you've got a 327 inch engine with a 106 millimeter turbo on it, you've probably already shot yourself in the foot. This video may be able to help you a little bit, but again, going back to the first two things I said, this will not completely fix a mechanical mismatch of parts or mechanical screw up. So for reference, this engine is 400 inches. It's got Blue Thunder cannon valve heads, and the intake manifold is actually 420, I believe, cubic inches. The cam is in the neighborhood of 275-ish degrees of duration, and about 780 lift. So this is a pretty, radical as far as turbo cams go. And then, like I said, the turbo is a 98 millimeter from Precision, the ProMod Gen 2. So what we're going to go over in data logs is all based off of this combination. This combination just made 1980 rear wheel horsepower. Well, at the hub, not on the tires, but same thing. And I drive this car on the street, and it also gets raced a good bit. But this is, as you can tell probably from how dirty everything is, this is how I go about getting them all to come up on the chip. There's a couple other things that play into spool up. I don't want to get too deep into it, but header primary size, crossover size, all that kind of stuff plays into it. There's tons of debate about that. I don't want to get into it. I'm just going to show you how we do it in the software with ignition timing and with fuel and with RPM. So this is just to show you kind of what all these data logs are showing. That's why my timing numbers don't necessarily matter to you. Okay, so just forget that, oh hey, he said use 30 degrees in this. I didn't tell you to put 30 degrees of timing in your stock bottom end LS. I didn't tell you to put 40 degrees of timing in it. I didn't tell you to put any of that in it. What I'm telling you, what I'm going to show you is how to look at a data log and use your torque converter basically as a kind of as an engine dyno, because not all of us have engine dynos. So we're going to use the torque converter in essence to see how the engine responds and what it likes. So this has kind of been a proven thing for me and quite a few other people that works every single time to get them to come up as fast as they're going to come up. I tuned quite a few of the small block single turbo cars, and they all typically come up pretty fast. So unless something's completely just mismatched, then we have to work around it, or we have to fix what's mismatched, not try to work around it with a tuning software. So let's go look at some data. All right, sorry about the long intro there, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that numbers that you see here are not what you're supposed to plug into your engine, okay? So, first thing I'm going to explain is if we're at this point of worrying about spooling up a turbo engine, this thing should already be pretty close with the tune-up as far as start, idle, drivability, in power, the whole 9 yards. We should be pretty close. If you just started the engine last night and now you think it needs to go on the trans brake and whatnot, then maybe revisit this video later. But this is under the assumption that you've already kind of got a decent running engine. Maybe you've already raced it a little bit. This thing's a little lazy to come up on the brake, and you kind of don't really know what to do. If this is a new build and you just got it fired up, you revisit this later. Okay. So anyway, what I typically do after I've gotten a car started, running, idling, driving around pretty good, or if it's a race car, taking throttle decent and it already came off the dyno or whatever it is, this is how I go about it. So you'll notice that my entire timing table below 3.8 pounds of boost, all through here it's 30 degrees, right? So all this is 30 degrees. So the reason this is all 30 degrees is because I want one single number to find out how the converter is going to grab the engine. It's a lot easier than making a nice smooth linear reduction of timing as boost increases. This is going to get changed back, okay? But for right now, it is going to stick one solid number. So in this case, it's 30 degrees. And as we look at some data logs, we're going to see where that number starts to change. So again, the number is arbitrary, but typically, wherever it's driving around and cruising around the best is where I start, right? So we've got 30 degrees of timing jammed in it all over the place right here, okay? I've got no timing modifiers or anything like that going on. Now, what I want to show you is some data logs and ones. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull up this data log. Now, this is a comparison data log, and I named it 30 degrees low TPS, okay? So the first thing I want to point out before we get too much into the timing aspect of it is, if you don't put your foot to the floor, there's a good chance it's going to spool pretty slow, okay? So if you look, we're starting all of our logs at 30% TPS, and I zeroed them out at 30% TPS. So when the first main log, not the comparison log, reaches 30% TPS, it zeroes out, okay? So if you notice up here, we're barely in the gas, 12%. And if you notice the first one, the main log, it's also slow. So you'll see that don't go judging how long it takes to get to the chip if you can't put your foot to the floor, all right? So I know it's pretty basic, but I just wanted to point out that, putting your foot to the floor is actually kind of important if you want to go up on the chip. So some of you guys that roll into it real nice and soft and slow, that's a problem. So that was just the first thing I wanted to show you. But remember, we're talking about having 30 degrees right here, all over the place. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at this. Now, this is 30 degrees of timing. Now disregard pretty much from here over. We're not even going to look at that. So we're only going to look at from here to here. So if you stand on the trans brake for a while, and you let it pop and bang and build boost, you put a bunch of heat into the converter. That's not what our goal here is, okay? What we want to do is we want to see where this thing rolls over at, where the converter grabs it. So what I mean by is where the converter grabs it is right around here, okay? So if you look, I've got two separate logs. They both read 30 degrees, right? Both same, 0.7 inches of vacuum, both same target air fuel, about the same dome pressure. We've got a little bit of a fueling difference here. Okay, I'm going to get into that in a minute. But notice we got a 200 RPM gap between the two. All right. Now, TPS was 100%, but we got a little bit of a gap. We have a 200 RPM gap. What our goal here is to see where the converter grabs it. So if we had 30 degrees of timing in this one, and then we make another pull at, say, 32 degrees of timing, see if it flashes higher. Now, the reason I have this graph up here to show you two different flash points, in essence, is because one of these, and I'll let y'all figure it out, one of these was done at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when it was 95 degrees outside. The other one was done later that night at about 10 o'clock at night when it was about 60 degrees outside. So, as you can tell, this one was done at 60 degrees outside, and this one was done when it was 90 degrees outside. So we have close to the same result, but they're different, okay? They're off by a little bit. So the whole goal here is to get this thing to get up on the two-step as fast as we can, okay? So the faster we can hit this limiter right here, right? Our limiter set on this one is 4,300. The faster we can get to that limiter, the better. All right, so now if you notice, this is our boost number down here, and you'll see that the solid line, our main log, not the comparison, is ahead. The air was a lot better. So the better the air, the faster it seems to come up and make power. So when you start comparing logs, besides the fact of just putting your foot to the floor, you also have to keep in mind that when it's 40 degrees or 50 degrees outside and the air is perfect, right, as some of y'all like to call it boost weather, if it's boost weather the first time you do this, and then you go and you try to do this again as a comparison, and it's 100 degrees outside, that's not boost weather. That's crap weather, and you can't really judge how one is responding versus the other. As you can see, there's quite a bit of difference in how these two responded. Here we're on the chip at 1.8, and here we don't get to the chip until 2.1. So some people may think that that's minute. Oh man, it still goes to the chip in 1.8 seconds or 2.1. That's fine. Just always keep it in mind that when you're trying to do a comparison between changing settings, between timing, that you have to keep your environmental conditions similar, right? So anyway, those are the two reasonably large caveats. Keep your foot to the wood and do it in the same weather, okay? Now, what we're looking for when we spool up a turbo is pretty much the first 0.8 seconds are really important, okay? So we're going to zoom in, we're going to look at just the first 0.8. So here we are, 0.8. So which one would you say makes more torque? Okay, so the idea of torque is you have a torque converter behind this engine, and the torque converter is stopping the engine from revving because the converter is going to grab the engine and tug it down, right? It's going to hold it back. So if we've got an engine, my engine right here, it flashed to 3,400 in good weather and 3,276 in not so good weather, right? It's reasonably close to each other. We know 30 degrees gets us about 3,400 RPM, right? So what you'll do is, and the way I go about this, is I will go back into my global, and this is something you kind of just play with, right? So here, I'm going to change this. Since we don't care about it popping and banging and hitting the chip, we want to see where it flashes to, right? Because we only want to be on the trans brake for a second. We don't need to lay into it to, to find out what the engine likes for timing, right? So here we're going to go in here, and the first thing that I would do is I'd put 32 degrees in it, and I'd repeat, okay? So I'd go to 32 degrees, and I would redo my spool up, and I'd let off of the throttle at 1 second into it. So right where the engine, it starts to come up, it goes and it stalls it, right? So wherever the converter kind of tugs it down, right? So that's where you stop, shut the car off, let it cool down, pull the data log and compare it, right? So we have 30 degrees versus 32 degrees. Which one flashed higher? If 32 degrees picks you up 150, 200 RPM in the same conditions and the same throttle, then we know that the engine likes 32 degrees. Now, before you start jamming a bunch of timing into your engine, you have to understand something, that just because we've got 30 degrees in the engine, or 32 or 28 or 21, whatever the number is, again, it's an arbitrary number that we're talking about right now because my engine's probably different than yours. Whatever that number is, that doesn't mean that more is better, okay? So this right here, we try 32 degrees. If we don't see any type of a response from gaining 2 degrees of timing, right? If we don't see any type of a change in how high the converter flashes, go the other way. Put 28 degrees in it, okay? So if 28 degrees yields us a result like this, right? So imagine, we'll just, for instance here, if this was the same exact weather conditions, this is 28 degrees, this is 30 degrees, then, or I'm sorry, this is 30 degrees, this is 28 degrees, right? Then we know that the engine likes 28 degrees more. If you're on an ethanol or methanol based car, then you can start putting fuel to it. So on methanol, what I typically do is I find where it flashes the highest RPM based off of timing, right? So say 30 degrees, right, or 26, whatever it is, and then I start putting fuel in it, right? So I'll just change the target air fuel number, and then I'll let it offset in the fuel map. But as we start changing the target air fuel number, you'll do the same thing. So this isn't just a 15-minute fix, and this is how we get it to spool. I tune a lot of small block turbo cars, and I'm around a lot of small block turbo cars, and some of them spool up really, really well, and it's because the owner or the tuner or myself or whoever it is that was behind the keyboard spent the time to invested the time to actually figure out what the engine actually likes, okay? So if you don't have an engine dyno sitting at your disposal whenever you want, we're using basically the torque converter to tell us where does the engine like for timing and for fuel. So we'll look at, there we go, here's another one. So notice you've got 30 degrees in this one as well, and they kind of level off, but one starts to climb a lot faster than the other. Now, no matter what it is, if we look at that same 0.8, right, that same 0.8 of a second, 30 degrees was our number for this combo. The change that I made here was between target air fuel, okay? So one is just a little bit richer than the other, and the reason being, it liked it leaner, right? It liked it a little bit leaner. So I know we're splitting hairs here, but when it comes to getting this thing to pop and bang on the chip, that one was a little bit faster, okay? So when I talk about being lean or being rich, prior to getting to the chip, typically most engines like them lean and mean to get to the chip, and fat and retarded once they're on the chip. Okay, so what that means is this area, we're going to data log and then activate overlay. So this area here is going up to the chip. Okay, so we're getting to the rev limiter, right? So this area right here was on its way to the rev limiter. All right, now we can look at the fuel map and we can start adding fuel here, or we can go to target air fuel and just offset it here and let it do its thing. But what I'm getting at is some engines don't like being rich on the way to the chip. If they do, if you've got it way too rich to the chip, it'll typically respond very well to more timing going up to the chip. So this is kind of just a rule of thumb that I've always used is I put it to the wood and I see where the converter grabs it, right? So if it's 30 degrees, if it's 28 degrees, if it's 22 degrees, whatever it may be, you have the ability to change it, dramatically and quickly. So what I always try to tell anybody that's been through my classes or anybody that contacts me and asks me any questions or whatever is that you don't need to get in a rush about this, because when you go to the racetrack, the worst thing that can happen is with a turbo car is you put it on the trans brake, you put it to the floor, and nothing happens. The thing just never gets to the chip. It never lights off. You look like an idiot. And then the car leaves, it goes 149, 60 foot, and then you're scratching your head going, well, what the heck happened? This thing made 2,000 horsepower on the dyno, and it doesn't 60 foot worth of crap. And then it doesn't follow a boost curve, and it doesn't do anything that it's supposed to do, or it spins the tire 60 foot out because all the power finally came in. Work on this in your shop, like I always preach, is work in your shop, not in the racetrack, and get this nailed down before you go anywhere. You have plenty of time in your shop. Instead of watching this YouTube video or something, go out to your shop and play with it, right? So your engine may be really happy at 25 degrees of timing. That's why timing numbers from somebody else's combo, even though it may be similar, is completely irrelevant when it comes to your engine, right? So you don't know what your engine wants versus their engine. So add timing, start removing timing, see where the converter rolls over at. Okay, this RPM, this 0.8 into the you go into the floor is important. All right, I always look at right around 0.8, 0.6 to 1.0 into you go into the floor, where the converter grabs it. I deal with a converter company that I've mentioned before that is fantastic. Again, my combo is not an easy one to. It's not exactly hard, but it's not extremely easy to light off considering the weight of the car, how tight the converter is, and the fact that I drive the car around town. So it's got a very, very tight converter in it in comparison, and the more you work on it, the easier it'll be to get this thing to actually light off. So the next thing I want to show you, once you've kind of come up with whatever your magic number is, right, for your application, the next thing I want to show you is once you get them onto the chip, okay? So I've made a video on this before, and it was on an advanced table for using a boost builder. So there's two things here that you have to remember. You set your RPM for your limiter here, ignition parameters, rev limit right here. Okay, so whatever rev limiter, right? So say 4,200. Okay, and then the next thing is how much dome pressure are you applying while you're on the trans brake, right? So when you're grabbing the trans brake, you've got 13 psi of dome pressure trying to hold the wastegate shut. All right. So when you're doing these tests, even when you get to seeing where the converter rolls over to, always be repetitive, right? So you always want 13 pounds of dome pressure if that's going to be the number you use. Same thing with the limiter won't matter as much because you should be getting out of the throttle before it ever hits the limiter, right? 4,200 here, and as we were showing in these logs here, we're rolling over around 34, 33, 3,400. So we're about 1,000 RPM away. We should never, you should be getting out of the throttle here. It's let it see where it grabs and then let off of it. And if you have a turbo car, you know exactly where that point is because you've probably sat there and went, what the heck is going on? And then it finally starts to light off and build some boost. So first step, find that timing number, find that fuel value that it likes on its way to the chip, okay? Typically lean and mean, and when I say lean and mean, that means a little bit less fuel and a little bit more timing than normal on the way to the chip, okay? So once you've got that nailed down and you find, okay, a lot of people I talk with and work with and help and whatnot, we typically find 200 to 300 RPM more of what we'll call flash or getting up onto the trans brake. We typically find 200 to 300 more RPM. And if we're only 700 RPM away from our target rev limiter, then 300 RPM is quite a bit. I know it doesn't seem like much, but spend the time, do it now, and you won't have to be, looking like a jackass on the starting line, sitting there on the trans brake cooking a transmission, and then calling your transmission and converter guy claiming that, this thing's brand new and it's smoked. What's wrong with it? What's wrong with it is that you didn't spend the time in the shop to figure it out before you went to the racetrack and you burnt up their transmission. So now to address the once it's on the chip, right? So we'll use this one. So now, again, remember I told you that I just shoved the same number in here everywhere, okay? So you can do this a couple different ways. If you drive the car around town, wherever this thing flashes the highest, so 32 degrees here in this map, right? It's typically where these things drive the best too, but when you're driving it, it'll be down here, right? So you'll be in a heavier vacuum when you're just cruising around town. So you can fix your timing table here, but remember what that timing value was, right? So if you want to leave your timing value here, hey, we got 30 degrees, 30 degrees is the magic number right here. This is where it likes it, or all this has got to be 30 degrees. Then what you can do is start rolling your timing out of it at, 3.8 pounds of boost or whatever number you decide. Which leads me to the boost builder function that I made a video on this on how to use an advanced table for a boost builder. But when I typically figure out what an engine likes for a boost builder, but contrary to popular belief, I will take this entire section and shove the same timing value in it that is in here that we just figured out where it likes to go up to, goes up to the chip. Now you're probably looking at this and going, Jesus, he's got 30 degrees of timing, that's 22 pounds of boost in it, and then it goes to 15 degrees. The point of this is not that we're going to run this car down the racetrack like this. It's so that the math can be easier. We will adjust it accordingly, but it's so that the math can be easier to deal with when you work with your advanced table, okay? So you're not going to leave this like this, okay? So we've already worked on how to get this thing to flash and get up to the chip as fast as we can. Now we need to use a boost building function in order to remove timing, right? So advanced table, probably already watched this video from me on this, and this is pretty basic, right? So we've got no timing coming out of it until we reach 4.8 pounds of boost, and it starts to linear remove down to 23 degrees out of it by 6.0 pounds of boost. So this is a really quick, aggressive pull of timing, but it's already on the chip at 4.7 pounds of boost, and it won't fall back off of the chip. Now, remember I said we shoved 30 degrees of timing in that whole map there. It's so that we can make these numbers nice and easy to understand, okay? So 30 minus 23 is 7 degrees of timing. Instead of, okay, well, we're pulling 23 at 6 pounds, and then we got to go back over here, and at, at 6 pounds of boost, we should be, 24 degrees, and it's easier, I repeat, it's easier to start this way, okay? And then you can come back and linearly remove timing out of the engine the way, you should, and then modify your advanced table here accordingly. So it may look something like this. Your advanced table may be doing something like this, okay? This is pretty common, but, and then when you start getting up into boost, especially if you have an LS, those things don't like timing, you'll wind up doing this, okay? So this is all an offset of this. But when you start fooling with this in your shop, it's a heck of a lot easier to have one solid number here to subtract from. So there's been a peanut gallery that has made comments about, oh, they saw my timing map or something from a video that I made previously, and geez, this must be the spool zone or something. Well, the reason that was like that is because the math is a heck of a lot simpler when you're figuring out how to set up your advanced table, okay? Once you have your advanced table kind of figured out that, hey, this thing really likes 4 degrees of timing when it's on the chip at 5 pounds of boost and it really lights off there, well, remove a little bit here and go over here, over here, and start making your changes, right? So you may have 28 there, and you may have 20 here, whatever your numbers are. They're arbitrary for this conversation, but understand that this is how I go about doing it, all right? It's a heck of a lot easier to remove 23 from 30 than it is to continually have to come back here and go, how many degrees of timing were in this cell, how many were in this cell, what does it interpolate between here and here? I leave them all flat, do the math in the advanced table, and then once I figure out where it likes it, I refer to my data log right here, and I look and say, hey, right here, boost build is removing 13.8 degrees at 4.4, and we're down to 16 degrees of timing, and now we can modify our ignition table, our timing table, to correlate correctly as if it was in power going down the racetrack, and then offset that with less of a boost build. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. If you have questions, just ask me. Now, the things to look for when you are on the trans brake and you get to the chip and it's lazy or it's fast or whatever it may be. If you look, we've got 2 logs here, right? And they both start at 30 degrees of timing, okay? And one has got a pretty lazy removal rate of timing, and the other one's pretty aggressive, right? So I just make a channel, an input channel, to show me what the boost build retard is. But if you see that it starts to fall off of the chip, you have probably removed too much timing too aggressively, okay? If it has not fallen off the chip, and what I say by falling off the chip is you'll see it goes bang, 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 and then the engine RPM just kind of falls, it lulls, and then it comes back and bang, 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 bang. So it means you've created too much load by removing too much timing while on the rev limiter, okay? So that's when you get too aggressive with timing removal. If you're non-aggressive with timing removal, it will be, there you go, there's a spot right there. Let me close the comparison log. No, which one was it? I think it's, there we go, perfect. So right there you can see there's a good spot where it fell off of the chip. And if you notice, it fell off of the chip when it had, let's look, 9 degrees of timing and 3.8 pounds of boost. So I was a little bit aggressive with the removal of timing from this, right? So I removed it too fast, all right? So if you do remove it a little bit too fast, it will pull it off of the chip. And, you know, no matter how loose the converter is and whatnot, it'll eventually pull it off of the chip. So those are a couple things to look for. Hopefully this has given a little bit better of an explanation as to how I go about spooling up a big turbo on a small engine. I've done everything from 380-inch engines with 118 millimeter to 460-inch engines with 98s on them, all over in between. I've done a lot. Most of this is really relative to small blocks, because small block with a big turbo typically needs to leave on a good bit of boost in comparison to a big block with twins, because the big block makes so much torque it leaves on 5 to 7 pounds of boost. So that's why I say this is more of a small block single or twin turbo type of deal than it is a big block deal. If you have a big block, if you have a 565 and a single 118 and you can't figure out how to get it light off, you probably shouldn't have that car to begin with. But anyway, hopefully this answers some questions. And last but not least, with this boost builder, I want to show you what I do to stop them from continuing to climb and build boost. Some of you may have noticed it, but 15 pounds of boost is where I want this thing to leave at. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go over here, 15.1, enter. So that when it reaches 15.1 pounds of boost, it jams all the timing back in it and it calms it back down. Okay, so it'll calm it back by putting the timing back in it. It'll calm it back down and it'll sit there at 15.1, 15 to 15.1 pounds of boost. It's a lot more accurate than just relying upon what you put in here, hoping that your launch target is accurate, based off of dome pressure and spring pressure and wastegate, priority and where it's mounted. So hopefully that answered some questions. Let me know if you got any questions, and good luck getting them to spool. See you.